The airport was alive with noise, the rolling thunder of suitcase wheels, the metallic groan of conveyor belts, the chaotic chorus of voices echoing beneath the high glass ceilings. Halston International always felt like a city within a city, a place where stories crossed, collided, and vanished in the space of a few passing footsteps. But on this Tuesday morning, something strange pulsed beneath the ordinary hum. It was like a second heartbeat, faint, uneasy, impossible to name. Officer Mark DeLuca felt it before he understood it. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was experience, or maybe it was because his partner, Rex, the German shepherd with a reputation for saving lives, walked at his side with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. Rex didn't strut like other K9 dogs. He moved with purpose, always listening, always reading a world humans only barely understood. And today, Rex wasn't calm. Mark noticed it the moment they entered Terminal B instead of scanning casually. Rex's ears were locked forward, nostrils flaring, head low. He pulled slightly on the leash, as though following a trail only he could sense. "What do you smell, buddy?" Mark whispered beneath the noise. Rex didn't answer, of course, but he didn't need to. His body said everything. Something was wrong. The baggage screening area buzzed with business as usual, suitcases clacking against metal rails, agents chatting, passengers waiting impatiently for the all-clear to grab their belongings and rush off to catch flights. Nothing looked out of place. Nothing seemed off. But Rex suddenly stopped. Completely. As though the world froze around him. Mark followed his stare. A blue suitcase, ordinary, worn, and unimpressive, shifted down the conveyor belt with dozens of others. It bore a faded butterfly sticker, half peeled at the corner. Nothing dangerous, nothing suspicious. But Rex's body stiffened so tightly that Mark felt the leash tremble in his hand. The dog let out a low, rumbling growl. "Easy, talk to me," Mark murmured, bending slightly, trying to understand. The growl deepened. And then, like a switch flipping, Rex lunged. His bark tore through the air so violently that several passengers jumped. It wasn't a warning bark or a territorial bark. It was desperate, urgent. The kind of bark Rex only used when something, or someone, was in danger. Agents spun around, heads turned, conversations fell silent. The conveyor belt operators froze mid-reach. "Stop the belt," someone called. Rex barked louder, pulling so hard against the harness that Mark had to brace his weight to hold him back. The dog wasn't attacking, he was pleading, begging, alerting with everything he had. Mark's stomach tightened. He had worked with Rex long enough to know this wasn't a false alarm. This wasn't nerves or confusion or overreaction. Rex had found something alive. The belt screeched to a halt. One of the screening officers pulled the suitcase from the line with gloved hands. The moment they set it on the metal inspection table, Rex whined, a broken, distressed sound Mark had never heard before. People began gathering behind the security line, whispering, speculating. Is it a bomb? Did someone try to smuggle something? What's inside? Mark ignored them. His full focus was on Rex and on the trembling suitcase in front of him. A supervisor approached, eyes narrowed. "It's locked." "Cut it," Mark said. His voice didn't shake, but his heartbeat did. Bolt cutters snapped. The latch split with a metallic crack. The suitcase popped open, not fully, not enough to see inside, but enough for a faint sound to seep out. A soft whimper. Human. Small. Barely holding on. Every muscle in Mark's body froze. No way. One of the officers pulled the zipper the rest of the way. And the world fell silent. Inside the suitcase, wrapped in a tiny pink fleece blanket, was a little girl, no more than 2 years old. Her cheeks flushed, her breathing shallow, her fingers curled weakly as though reaching for a hand that never came. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Rex lowered his head and nudged toward the child, trembling. Mark's throat tightened, Call medics now." In that instant, in that breath of disbelief and horror, one truth burned through the room. If Rex hadn't barked, if he hadn't sensed her, the child would have never been found. And the dark mystery behind who put her there, and why, was only just beginning. Before we dive deeper, if you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe. I put my heart into crafting these stories for you, and your support means the world. For a moment that felt suspended outside of time, Officer Mark DeLuca simply stared at the small child curled inside the suitcase. Even as medics rushed in, even as onlookers whispered in stunned disbelief, even as Rex pressed desperately against the table trying to get closer, Mark couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't understand how a child, an actual living, breathing toddler, had ended up zipped inside a piece of luggage like forgotten cargo. It was only when Rex whined again, nudging his head into Mark's hip, that the officer finally snapped back to reality. "Yeah," Mark rasped softly. "I know, Boyd, I know." The medics lifted the little girl gently, their voices hushed and urgent as they checked her pulse, her breathing, the color of her skin. She was alive, but barely. Her breaths were thin, delicate, fragile, like each one might be her last. "Hypoxia," one medic murmured. "She hasn't had fresh air in a long time. We need to get her to the hospital immediately." The crowd's whispers rose. Who would do that to a child? Was she being smuggled? Is someone here looking for her? Security ushered people back, but the whispers clung to the air like smoke. Mark forced himself to focus. Do we have the suitcase's tag? Anything to identify the owner? One of the screening agents shook his head. No tag, no name. They removed all identifiers. Of course they did. Mark straightened, his jaw tightening. Someone hadn't just abandoned this child. They'd made sure she couldn't be traced. Whoever they were, they had planned this. Rex barked sharply, pulling Mark's attention again. The dog wasn't watching the medics now. He was staring at the conveyor belt as if expecting something else to arrive, something connected. Mark frowned and ran a hand along Rex's back. "What is it? What else do you smell?" But Rex stayed locked onto the belt, muscles tense, paws digging slightly into the floor. Mark didn't like that. He turned to the supervisor. "Run the belt again, slowly." The supervisor blinked. "You think there's something else?" "Rex does," Mark said quietly, "and Rex is never wrong." They restarted the belt. Suitcases rolled forward, green, red, black, patterned, scuffed, brand new. Ordinary luggage belonging to ordinary travelers. But Rex didn't react. It wasn't the belt itself. It was the one suitcase. The child. The mystery. The danger. Mark pressed a steadying hand to Rex's fur. "Okay, good work today, buddy. You saved her." Rex lowered his head but didn't relax. His body remained tight, uneasy, like he sensed that saving her was only the beginning. The medics prepared the child for transport. A tiny oxygen mask covered her mouth and nose. Her eyelids fluttered weakly. Mark stepped closer. "Will she be okay?" "We won't know until we get her stabilized," one of the medics replied. "But she's fighting." That was enough for now. They wheeled her away, vanishing through the automatic doors that led to the airport's emergency exit. Then the adrenaline evaporated, and reality hit Mark like a wave. Someone had carried a suitcase containing a living child through this airport. Someone had placed it on the belt. Someone had walked away. And that someone was still out there. He needed to understand what had happened. He needed answers. And he knew that if Rex hadn't reacted, the suitcase would have passed through, boarded a plane, and been stowed in cargo, dark, cold, sealed. The little girl never would have been found. The thought made his stomach turn. Why had she been placed in the suitcase? Who would do something like that? And how had no one noticed? The more Mark thought about it, the more a knot formed in his chest. He turned to Rex. "We're not done, not by a long shot." Rex gave a low huff of agreement. Back inside the airport's K-9 operations room, Mark swapped out Rex's vest and gave him some water. Rex drank, but he kept glancing at the door, unsettled. Mark leaned against the counter, rubbing his temples. "You're not letting this go, are you?" Rex raised his head, his ears pricked. Mark gave a tired laugh. "Yeah, me neither." He looked around the small room. Bulletin boards with alerts and schedules, lockers where officers stored gear, a small break area where coffee went stale within an hour. He had worked here for years. He'd seen everything from drug mules to bomb scares to runaway teens trying to board flights with fake passports. But this was different. This was personal in a way he couldn't explain. A child, a defenseless little girl, left to suffocate in silence. That wasn't just criminal, it was evil. He grabbed his phone and dialed the airport-specific law enforcement unit. "It's DeLuca. I need all surveillance pulled from Terminal B, baggage drop, screening, and the entrances leading to that area. Time window, last 2 hours." A voice on the other end replied, "Already on it. This one's big. FBI's been notified." Of course they had. A child locked inside luggage crossed every threshold of federal involvement. But Mark didn't care about jurisdiction. He cared about that little girl. He cared about what Rex had sensed. He cared about finding the person who did this. As he ended the call, Rex padded over and rested his chin on Mark's knee. Mark stroked behind his ears. "You saved her, buddy. You really did." Rex closed his eyes briefly, but his body remained tense, on edge. Mark frowned. "What is it now? What are you feeling?" It wasn't fear. It wasn't adrenaline. It was something else. As though Rex sensed that the danger wasn't over. That the suitcase was only the first piece of a much darker puzzle. Mark exhaled slowly. "We'll find out, I promise." An hour later, Mark found himself in the security control room, a dimly lit space filled with a dozen screens displaying every inch of the airport. Analysts scrolled through footage, frame by frame, camera by camera. The blue suitcase appeared multiple times, at the curbside drop-off zone, then at the check-in kiosk area, then sliding across the scale at the baggage counter. But each time it was in motion, the owner was obscured. A hat brim, a turn back, a passing crowd blocking the view. Someone had planned this. Someone had known exactly where to walk. Exactly where cameras couldn't get a clean shot. And then one analyst froze a frame. "There," she said, "that's the best angle we've got." Mark leaned in close. A person, a woman maybe, or a slender man, stood at the kiosk rolling the blue suitcase behind them, baggy hoodie, face turned completely away, hair tucked beneath a beanie, gloves on their hands. No distinguishing features. And the suitcase was upright. The analyst zoomed in on the bottom of the frame, and something made Mark's skin crawl. The suitcase moved unnaturally, wobbling slightly, as though something inside shifted. Rex had known. Rex had sensed it. And Mark realized that if they could identify the person in that frame, even from the slightest detail, they might uncover the truth. Motive, identity, connection, everything. But for now, all they had was a shadow. A shadow pulling a suitcase containing a child who couldn't speak for herself. Mark clenched his jaw. "Keep digging. There has to be another angle, a reflection, something." Because he would find this person. He had to find them. Rex had already saved the child. Now it was Mark's turn to find the one responsible. Before we continue, what would you have done in this moment? I'd love to hear your thoughts. The control room hummed softly, keyboards clacking, screens flickering, quiet murmurs passing between analysts who were already buried deep in the mounting puzzle. But Mark couldn't sit still. He paced behind the row of monitors, replaying the same image in his head over and over. The unknown figure with the blue suitcase, their face hidden, their posture deliberately unremarkable. Sometimes evil didn't look like a villain. Sometimes it looked like a person blending in. Rex lay at the doorway, chin on his paws, eyes tracking every movement. He didn't relax, not fully, not even close. Mark glanced down at him. "You still feeling something, boy?" Rex didn't blink, didn't look away. That tension in him, it had started the second the suitcase hit the belt, but it hadn't faded, not even after the child had been taken to safety. It was like Rex knew this wasn't over, like he sensed there was still a threat lingering in the air. Mark trusted Rex's instincts more than anything. The dog had saved 3 lives in the past year alone by following feelings no human could understand. And right now, that instinct was screaming. "We're missing something," Mark muttered. An analyst turned. "We're still pulling feeds from multiple angles, nothing yet." "Keep going," Mark said. "There has to be something." He stepped out of the control room, Rex rising instantly to follow. He needed to think, needed space. A child didn't just end up in a suitcase on a conveyor belt by accident. There were 2 possibilities, both awful in their own way. 1, the child was being trafficked. 2, someone close to the child had done this. Neither possibility sat right with him. He walked along the quiet staff corridor toward the glass overlook that gave him a bird's-eye view of Terminal B from above. The terminal looked peaceful again. Passengers walking, agents scanning tickets, families reuniting at arrival gates. Life had returned to normal. But normal didn't erase what had happened. Mark looked down. "Who are you?" he whispered to no one in particular. "And why that child?" He didn't get far into the thought before his radio crackled. "DeLuca, come in." Mark snapped to attention. "Go. We've got something. You're gonna want to see this." He didn't waste a second. Rex trotted at his side as they made their way back to the control room. The analyst who had called him pointed at the screen. "We scrubbed surrounding footage. You told us to look for reflections or secondary angles. We found one." She rewound the footage. The scene played at the curbside drop-off, the suitcase being unloaded from the back seat of a rusted gray sedan. "Pause it," Mark said. The image froze. "Zoom on the car window." The analyst zoomed. And there, in the faint reflection of the window, distorted but visible, was a partial profile of the person unloading the suitcase. Not a face, not fully, but enough to show the shape of the jawline, the outline of the nose, the curve of the cheek. It was something. But what made Mark lean closer wasn't the facial outline. It was the child. Behind the person unloading the suitcase, the reflection caught something else, just for a split second. A small hand gripping the back of the passenger seat. A tiny hand still moving. "The kid was alive when they arrived," the analyst said quietly. "They didn't zip her into the suitcase until they were at the curb." Mark stared, horrified but composed. "Which means they did it here, on airport property." "Exactly." "And no one noticed." His voice tightened. Rex let out a low growl. Mark looked down. Rex's fur was raised slightly, his eyes fixed on the screen like he understood what he was seeing. The analyst pointed again. "The sedan drove up at 9:43 a.m. We traced its path. It circled the airport twice before pulling in, which suggests hesitation. Or guilt. Or fear. Or someone trying to work up the nerve to commit an unthinkable act." "Do we have a license plate?" Mark asked. "We tried. The plate's obstructed. A sticker partially covers it." Of course it was. "They knew what they were doing," Mark said quietly. But the analyst wasn't done. "There's more." She clicked another feed, this time from outside camera coverage near a prepaid parking garage exit. The sedan appeared again. Only without the suitcase. "They left it at the curb," she said. "Dropped it as though it was just normal luggage. Then they drove off. And we still can't get a plate." She shook her head. The camera angle's too low. Mark clenched his jaw. Find the plate, I don't care how long it takes. He turned and left the room again, the weight in his chest growing heavier with every step. But he didn't get far. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered, DeLuca. A voice he didn't recognize spoke, quiet and shaking. Are you the officer who found the suitcase? Mark stopped cold. Who is this? The voice cracked. You have to listen. They're coming. They're looking for her. You don't understand. She wasn't supposed to be found. Every muscle in Mark's body locked. Rex froze too, sensing the shift instantly. Who are you? Mark demanded. I can't say. They're watching if I tell you. The line crackled violently. Then silence. The call cut off. Mark immediately tried to redial, but the phone displayed. Number unavailable. Blocked. Disposable. The voice had sounded young, afraid, terrified even, and the word they echoed in Mark's head. They? Who were they? And why wasn't the child supposed to be found? Mark looked down at Rex. This is bigger than we thought. Rex stared back, ears pricked ready. The inciting incident, the suitcase, the child, the mysterious figure, had just cracked open into something far more dangerous. 20 minutes later, the situation escalated again. Mark stood with the FBI liaison in the airport's administrative security wing, going over the scant details they had so far. Agents were securing the drop-off zone, interviewing staff, reviewing passenger lists, checking for missing child reports. But nothing matched. No Amber Alerts, no recent kidnappings, no reported missing toddlers fitting the little girl's description. How does a 2-year-old show up with no reports filed? The liaison, Agent Carter, muttered under his breath. Mark shook his head. Either her guardian can't report it or they won't. Carter raised an eyebrow. Whoa. Mark nodded. If the person responsible knew her, they might not want attention. Carter exhaled. So we've got a child with no name, no ID, no reports, and an unknown suspect we can barely see on camera. And a phone call warning us that someone is coming to get her. Carter glared at him. You left that part out. I just got it. The agent cursed under his breath. This is spiraling. Mark didn't disagree. Because the moment he left the conversation, heading back into the main corridor, everything he feared was confirmed. A shrill alarm burst through the airport. Security doors sealed. Announcements blared. Attention! Security breach near Terminal B. All units respond immediately. Mark froze. Rex's head snapped toward the sound, body taut, ready to sprint. Mark whispered, You hearing this? Rex barked once, sharp, decisive. Mark ran. Travelers ducked. Security hurriedly moved people aside. Radios crackled with chaos. When Mark reached the barricades, 2 officers stepped forward, panic in their faces. One pointed toward the medic's hallway, the hall where the little girl had been taken. There was an attempt, the officer said breathlessly. Someone tried to reach the child. What? They didn't get to her. We stopped them. But they were fast, hooded, covered. They forced open a restricted door and made it halfway down the hall before escaping into a service stairwell. Mark's heart hammered. Did they say anything? The officer swallowed. Just one thing. What? She belongs to us. Rex snarled, actual, visceral anger. Hackles raised, teeth bared in a rare display Mark had only seen twice in his career. Mark stared down the hall, where the intruder had disappeared. The inciting incident wasn't the suitcase. It wasn't the child. It was this. Someone wanted her back. And they were willing to do anything to get to her. Things were about to spiral in ways no one expected. What do you think happens next? The service stairwell door was still swinging when Mark reached it. A faint metallic echo bounced down the concrete steps, fading into the distance. Whoever had tried to reach the little girl had slipped away fast, too fast for someone panicking or unprepared. This wasn't the act of a desperate parent. This was something colder. Calculated. Rex lunged forward, nose to the floor, snout pressing into the faint trail left behind. Mark gripped the leash, letting Rex lead but keeping tension. He had no idea if the suspect was armed or if they had planned a second surprise attack. They raced down one flight, then another. But by the third, Rex slowed. A frustrated whine escaped him. He lifted his head, sniffed the air, then circled once in confusion. They doubled back, Mark muttered, or masked their scent. The stairwell was a maze in itself. Multiple exit points, service corridors, maintenance pathways. Someone who knew the airport's inner structure could vanish inside it like mist. Rex barked sharply, angry that he'd lost the trail. "It's okay, buddy," Mark said, rubbing behind his ears. "They won't get far." But the truth was more complicated. The suspect had slipped away, and now Mark had to face what that meant. Someone out there wanted that child badly enough to break into restricted medical access and sprint headfirst into law enforcement territory. That wasn't normal behavior. That wasn't a random criminal. It was someone connected to the suitcase. Someone who knew exactly where the child was being treated. Someone who had been watching. And someone who wasn't done. Back in the airport's administrative wing, the medics reported that the little girl was stable enough for transport. She'd been moved to a secure pediatric unit at Halston General Hospital, escorted by 2 officers and an FBI agent. Mark wasn't assigned to accompany them, but hearing she was safe, temporarily, released a pressure he hadn't realized was crushing his chest. For all his training, all his experience, nothing unsettled him more than harm to a child. But this situation felt different, personal, like he'd been pulled into something he didn't yet understand. He paced the hallway while Rex sat close, watching his every step. He kept replaying the phone call in his mind. "They're coming, they're looking for her, she wasn't supposed to be found." That voice, afraid, trembling, desperate, had been trying to warn him. But why? Who was that person? And how did they know what had been planned? More troubling, why were they afraid of the people searching for the girl? His thoughts spiraled until Agent Carter appeared at the end of the hall. "We need to talk," Carter said. "Then talk." Carter handed him a folder. "We pulled partial prints from the suitcase. Most belonged to the manufacturer or airport staff, but there was one, faint, smudged but usable." Mark opened the folder. A name printed beneath, the blurred black fingerprint hit him like a slap. Elias Kearns. His stomach dropped. Carter must have seen the reaction. "You know him?" Mark nodded slowly. "Yeah, everyone in law enforcement knows him. He's been on our radar for years." Elias Kearns was a trafficker, a ghost, a mastermind behind a network so well hidden most agencies couldn't prove it existed. He didn't handle drugs. He didn't handle money laundering. His business was people. Specifically, children. Mark felt the air grow cold. "You think he's involved?" he asked. "We know he's involved," Carter replied. "That's his print." "And the child? We think she's one of his." Mark's fists clenched so tightly his nails dug into his palms. "Then why abandon her? Why put her in a suitcase? That's not his style." Carter exhaled. "We don't know, but something's off, and we need to consider the possibility she wasn't meant to survive." Mark's pulse hammered. "Then why try to retrieve her?" Carter's expression hardened. Maybe they realized she survived. Maybe they need her. Or maybe someone connected to Kearns is acting without his permission. Mark shook his head. Nothing made sense. And then Carter added something even darker. "We have reports that one of Kearns' operations recently suffered a split. Internal betrayal. Someone on the inside, someone who knew too much, went rogue. Mark froze. Rogue. Yeah, they took something, something valuable, and vanished. A chill crept up Mark's spine. What did they take? He asked. Carter hesitated. We don't know for sure, but some intel suggests it wasn't money. The implication hit Mark like a punch. Not money. A child. The child. The toddler in the suitcase. So she wasn't being disposed of. She was being hidden. Taken from the organization. Protected. Or smuggled. Or used. He didn't like the possibilities swirling in his head. Why call me? He asked. Why warn me? Carter shrugged. Maybe they thought you'd listen, or maybe Rex's track record made them think you'd find her. Mark ran a hand through his hair. This is spiraling. But Carter wasn't finished. And we found something else. He handed Mark another sheet, an enlargement from the earlier reflection captured on the silver door of the sedan. The faint outline of a face. Weak, distorted, incomplete. But the shape of the jawline, the angle of the cheek, the delicate structure of the nose. Mark stared at it, then whispered, "This isn't Kearns." "No," Carter said. "We don't think the person who dropped the child was working for him." Mark's eyes narrowed. Then who were they? "We're trying to find out, but whoever they were, they cared enough to bring her here. They hesitated. They circled the lot twice. They didn't leave her in a random alley or abandoned building. They brought her to a crowded airport, in the one place a trained dog would be screening luggage." Mark stiffened. "You're suggesting they wanted her to be found?" Carter nodded. "Exactly." Mark felt a tremor run through him. Someone had risked their own life to get this child away from Elias Kearns. Someone had hidden her in a suitcase, not to discard her but to sneak her through unnoticed. A terrible plan, yes, but maybe the only plan they had. Someone had dialed Mark's number to warn him. And someone else from Kearns' organization had tried to retrieve her. Mark looked down at Rex. Rex stared back, eyes blazing with determination. He understood. A child was being hunted. A rescuer was terrified. A criminal empire was responding. And Mark, alongside Rex, was now standing in the middle of it all. Hours passed. The airport slowly returned to some semblance of normalcy, though tension hummed beneath every word exchanged by security. The public didn't know the details, but rumors were spreading fast. In the middle of preparing a briefing for the overnight shift, Mark's phone buzzed again. Blocked number. Mark's heart kicked hard. He answered immediately. "This is Officer DeLuca." A shaky breath. You have to help her." It was the same voice. Mark stepped into a quiet corridor, signaling Rex to stay close. "I'm listening. Tell me who you are." "I can't if they find me." "I don't care about your name," Mark said calmly. "Just tell me the truth. Why the suitcase? Why the child?" Silence. Then a broken whisper. She wasn't safe anymore. "Why?" Another breath, trembling, weak, "Because she's his." Mark froze. "Whose?" But the caller didn't answer. Instead, they hurried on as if time were running out. "They know she's alive. They know she didn't suffocate. And they're coming for her. You have to get to the hospital. You have to." A loud crash sounded on the other end of the call. Mark straightened. "Hey, what's happening? Talk to me." A scream, short, muffled. Then, the line went dead. Mark didn't move. Couldn't move. Every cell in his body went still. Then Rex barked, loud, sharp, urgent. Mark snapped out of it. He grabbed the radio on his shoulder. "This is DeLuca. I need immediate units to Halston General Hospital. Potential threat incoming. Repeat, hospital may be targeted. Move now." He didn't wait for confirmation. He didn't wait for backup. He didn't wait for Carter or authorization or orders. He just ran. Rex sprinted at his side, paws pounding the polished floor, barking for the path ahead to clear. Because whatever was happening, whatever this child was hiding, whatever secrets she carried, whoever she belonged to, they weren't done. And if the man on the phone was right, neither was the danger. Put yourself in their shoes for a second. What would you do here? Mark didn't remember the drive to Halston General Hospital. He didn't remember hitting the siren switch or weaving through midday traffic or the shriek of horns as cars parted for him like a living tide. His mind was locked on one thing, one image, one horrifying possibility. Someone was going after the little girl. And if the frantic caller was telling the truth, they might already be there. Rex stood on the passenger seat, braced against the dashboard, barking every time they slowed for even a second. He could feel it too, the urgency, the danger, the electricity in the air that only animals seem to sense with perfect clarity. "We're gonna get there," Mark said, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to Rex or himself. "We're gonna get there in time." He prayed they weren't too late. He prayed the child was still breathing. He prayed the person who had warned him was still alive. When Mark burst through the hospital's main entrance, he was met with chaos. Nurses rushing, security radios crackling, visitors huddled in confusion. Something had happened. Something bad. Rex pulled forward so fiercely that Mark had to jog to keep up. "Officer," someone shouted, but Mark didn't stop. He couldn't. Not until he knew where the little girl was who had tried to reach her and what had gone wrong. 2 hospital security guards spotted him and signaled him over. "You're here about the pediatric incident." Mark stiffened. "Incident?" The guards exchanged a look that sent dread clawing up his spine. "This way." He followed them past the reception desk, past patient rooms, past a cluster of doctors whispering urgently. They reached the pediatric wing, and instantly Mark understood the severity of what had happened. Crime scene tape, armed security at every doorway, a shattered glass panel where a locked double door had once been secure, and the smell of something sharp, metallic, like fear itself had seeped into the air. "What happened?" Mark demanded. The guards hesitated until a man in a navy jacket stepped forward. "Agent Carter." He looked grim. "We got here minutes before you," Carter said. "Someone attempted to breach the pediatric unit." "Attempted?" Mark asked. "Did they get her?" "No," Carter said quickly. "The child is safe." The birthmark didn't realize he'd been holding slipped from his chest. Rex let out a soft whine of relief. But Carter added, "Someone else was." Mark's heartbeat kicked back up. "Who?" Carter motioned for him to follow. They walked down the corridor, stepping around a medic kneeling beside a blood smear on the floor. The medic cleaned it silently, the cloth turning red. Mark swallowed hard. Then they stopped beside a small alcove used for medical charts. A body lay on a stretcher, covered with a pale sheet. Mark felt his stomach twist. "Who is that?" Carter hesitated. "We don't know yet, but we're guessing it might be your caller." Everything inside Mark froze. He stepped closer, dread squeezing his ribs tight like a vice. He lifted the sheet slowly, bracing himself. Beneath it lay a young woman, late 20s, maybe early 30s. Dark hair matted, a bruise blooming along her jaw, eyes closed as though she were simply sleeping. Except she was. Rex let out a low, mournful whine. Mark whispered, Why does she look familiar?" Carter pulled out a photo. "Because we found this in her pocket." He handed it to Mark. It was a picture of the same woman, standing beside a toddler. The toddler. The little girl from the suitcase. A lump formed in Mark's throat. She wasn't the trafficker. She was trying to save her. "That's our working theory," Carter said. "We think she was the person who took the child from Elias Kearns." Mark felt a surge of conflicting emotions: relief that the child had someone who cared, and fury that this woman had died trying to protect her. "How did she get in here without being seen?" Mark asked. "She didn't," Carter said flatly. "She wasn't coming into the pediatric unit." Mark blinked. "What do you mean?" "She was trying to get out." The words hit Mark harder than any punch. "What?" Carter gestured toward the tape and destruction near the door. "She was already inside the unit when the assailant arrived. We believe she came here on her own, maybe to check on the child. She didn't go to the police. She came to see if the girl was alive." Mark's pulse quickened. Then the attacker found her first, Carter said, before they ever reached the child. A chill ran through Mark. Where was the attacker now? Carter exhaled. "Gone, lost in the stairwells. Hospital security is sweeping all floors." "And the woman?" Mark asked quietly. "Did she say anything before she died?" Carter hesitated, then shook his head. "No, she was unconscious when we found her." But something unsettled Mark. This woman had called him. She knew who he was. She had warned him. Why come here alone? Why not call again? Why not go to another officer? "Unless she didn't trust the authorities," Mark murmured. Carter nodded. "If she spent time inside Kern's network, she wouldn't trust anyone." Mark clenched his jaw. "Did she have ID?" "No, just the photo." "Any name?" "We're checking databases, but nothing yet." Mark looked at the picture again, taken in natural light, somewhere outdoors. The woman smiling softly at the little girl. The girl's tiny hand gripping her coat. A real bond. This wasn't a kidnapper. This was a mother figure, a protector, someone who risked everything to pull the child from Kern's grasp. "Why leave her in the suitcase?" Mark whispered. "Why not walk her into a police station?" Carter folded his arms. Maybe she knew Kearns had people everywhere. Maybe she thought the only chance was to hide the child where scanners and security would catch her. Mark's eyes widened. "Rex," he murmured. Carter nodded. "She was counting on your dog." The realization hit Mark like a bolt of lightning. The woman had relied on Rex's reputation. Someone had told her about him, or she'd seen a news story about his past rescues. She'd chosen the airport not because it was safe, but because it was the only place she knew Rex frequented. "She put the child where Rex would find her," Mark said, awed. "She trusted him more than anyone." Carter nodded grimly, "which means she was desperate." Mark looked down at Rex. Rex lowered his head in a gesture almost like grief. The hospital room where the child was kept was heavily guarded now: 2 FBI agents, 3 hospital security officers, and a reinforced door. Mark stepped inside, Rex close behind. The little girl lay in a small crib, hooked to monitors, breathing steadily thanks to oxygen support. Her tiny fingers twitched occasionally, like she was dreaming. Mark approached quietly. He wasn't sure what he expected to feel: anger, sorrow, determination. Instead, he felt a profound tenderness. "You've been through more than any child should," he murmured. Rex nudged the crib gently, sniffing the air around her protectively. A nurse approached. "Her vitals are stable, she's a fighter." "Has she said anything?" Mark asked. "A name, a word?" The nurse shook her head. "She hasn't spoken yet. Trauma can do that." "Trauma?" The word hung like a weighted fog. "Do we know anything about her medical history?" Mark asked. "No," the nurse said, "but she has something unusual." Mark turned. "Unusual?" The nurse hesitated, then gently lifted the girl's sleeve. "A birthmark, but not a simple one." On her upper arm, subtle but unmistakable, was a small, swirling pattern, almost like a brand, a spiral shape with 3 curved lines radiating out. Mark frowned. "Is that a symbol?" The nurse nodded. "It looks deliberate, not a natural shape." Carter, who had just entered the room behind them, froze. "Let me see that." Mark stepped aside so he could examine it. Carter inhaled sharply. "We've seen this before." Mark turned. "Where?" "On documents seized from Elias Kern's organization." Now Mark felt his pulse spike. "What does it mean?" Carter swallowed. "It means this child wasn't just trafficked." He looked at Mark with an expression torn between dread and disbelief. "She was selected." "For what?" Mark demanded. "Why her?" Carter shook his head slowly. "We don't know, but that mark, it means she was part of something Kearns never lets out of his sight." Mark stared at the little girl. Suddenly, everything clicked. Why someone tried to steal her back. Why the woman had risked everything to save her. Why the phone call warned they were coming. Why the attacker at the hospital had targeted the protector first. Why the organization was scrambling to retrieve her alive. This child wasn't just a victim. She was the key to something greater. Something dangerous. Something secret. Something tied to Elias Kearns in a way that terrified even his own insiders. Rex growled low, a warning rumble. Mark leaned closer to Carter. "What aren't you telling me?" Carter clenched his jaw. "Kearns doesn't brand children randomly," he said. "He brands only the ones meant for his highest-tier buyers, or—" He hesitated. "Or what?" Mark pressed. "Or the ones he plans to keep for himself." Mark felt the floor tilt beneath him. The little girl stirred in her crib, turning her head slightly, revealing her tiny cheek against the pillow. And Mark realized something with chilling clarity. This wasn't just about saving a child. This was about stopping a man who considered her property. A man powerful enough to send trained operatives into a hospital. A man ruthless enough to mark a child as his possession. A man who wanted her back at any cost. Mark whispered, "What did he want with her?" Carter stared at the birthmark. "I think we're about to find out." "Did you see that coming? Tell me your honest reaction." Mark stayed in the pediatric room long after the others left. The sun had begun to set, staining the window a soft orange. Machines hummed around the crib in a calming rhythm, the only steady thing in a world that suddenly felt unstable. Rex lay curled near the bed, though his eyes stayed open, alert, always watching. He hadn't looked away from the child for more than a few seconds since they arrived. Mark's thoughts churned. The birthmark, the woman who died trying to save the girl, the frantic warning call, the attacker in the hospital. Everything pointed to one chilling truth. Whoever wanted this child wasn't going to stop. Mark felt it in his bones. This wasn't over. This was the eye of the storm. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Carter stepped back in, holding a folder that looked worn from the number of times he had opened and closed it. "You need to see something," Carter said. Mark followed him into a quiet conference room down the hall. Carter placed the folder on the table, exhaled, and opened it to the first page. "These documents were recovered 6 months ago," Carter began, "during a raid on one of Elias Kearns' secondary properties. It was a highly classified operation. Only a handful of agents know the full scope." Mark leaned in. "What's in there?" Carter flipped to a page showing a list of names, mostly children. Next to each name were symbols, dates, and brief notes. Most of the names were crossed out. "Each symbol corresponds with a particular classification," Carter explained. "We never understood their purposes. We assumed they were identifiers for buyers, codes that tracked the children through Kearns' system." He turned to another page, an image of the exact birthmark on the girl's arm. Mark's breath caught. "There it is," he whispered. Carter nodded. "It's called the Trispiral Enclave. We've only seen this mark 3 times in 4 years. Every child associated with it vanished before we could make a recovery or gather intel. No trails, no sightings, nothing." "Like they disappeared," Mark said quietly. Exactly. Mark studied the mark more closely. The spiral wasn't random, it was precise, almost ceremonial in its symmetry. What does it mean? Mark asked. We think it's for children Kearns personally selects, Carter said. Either for buyers with unimaginable resources or for his own private operations. Mark felt a chill, and this girl. Carter closed the folder. She is the first trispiral child we've ever recovered alive. Mark absorbed the weight of that. Then we need to protect her at all costs, he said firmly. Carter nodded. I agree, but Kearns knows she's alive and he knows she's here. Does he know I have her? Mark asked. Carter hesitated. Possibly. Kearns has ways of getting information from hospital staff, airport personnel, even law enforcement. He has bribes, leverage, fear, you name it. Mark's jaw tightened. Then we move her. That's why I came, Carter said. The FBI is arranging emergency transport to a secure facility. Mark felt a sense of relief until Carter added. But it will take at least 2 hours to prep the route and the team. 2 hours? Mark stared at him. You're telling me we have to hold out here for 2 hours while Kearns, people could be closing in. Carter didn't sugarcoat it. Yes. Mark looked toward the hallway, imagining the maze of doors, corners, empty spaces where shadows lengthened. He could practically feel the clock ticking. Rex let out a low, uneasy growl from down the hall, like he sensed what was coming. Carter rested a hand on the folder. Mark, you've been involved with big cases. You know what this means. Yeah, Mark said. It means we're sitting ducks. Unless, Carter said, someone buys us the time we need. Mark lifted his gaze. Me, he said. And Rex, Carter added. Rex padded into the room as if he knew his name had been spoken. His ears pricked, his eyes watchful. Mark nodded slowly. We'll hold the line. Carter's expression softened. I'll stay too, you're not alone. The hospital felt different now. Before it had been tense, now it felt hunted. Mark and Carter did a sweep of the floor, checking exits, stairwells, and staff-only corridors. Rex led the way, every hair on his body raised, his steps silent and controlled. They passed a nurse at the station who glanced nervously at the security tape, blocking off the pediatric wing. Officer, she asked, voice shaky, do you think something going to happen? Mark didn't sugarcoat it. We're taking precautions. Stay with your colleagues, and if a lockdown alert sounds, go to your designated shelter area. The nurse swallowed hard and nodded. As Mark turned away, Carter whispered, they can feel it. Everyone can, Mark said. He wasn't wrong. Even the lights seemed dimmer. Even the air felt heavier. Even the quiet had a pulse, like the hospital itself was holding its breath. Once they reached the pediatric room again, Mark positioned himself near the door. Carter checked the windows, verifying they were sealed. 3 hospital security guards patrolled the hallway. The FBI's temporary surveillance cameras blinked to life above the doors. Mark checked his watch. 1 hour and 48 minutes left. Rex nudged Mark's hand gently. We're gonna be okay, Mark whispered, stroking the dog's fur. We just need to get her through the next couple hours. But even as he said it, he knew that wasn't the whole truth. Kearns wouldn't wait. He wouldn't hesitate. He wouldn't stop. At 7:42 p.m. the power flickered. Just once. Just long enough to make every machine beep, every light dim, every person tense. Mark stiffened. Carter spun around. That wasn't on our schedule. Then it happened again. A longer flicker. Lights buzzed, monitors glowed and faded, patients stirred. And Rex stood up instantly, rigid, ears pricked, nose pointed at the door. A deep, dangerous growl rumbled from his chest. Oh no, Mark breathed. He senses something. The third flicker wasn't a flicker at all. It was a blackout. The entire floor went dark. Screams erupted down the hallway, metal clattered, nurses shouted for flashlights, security radios crackled wildly. Emergency red lights kicked on, bathing the corridor in a sinister crimson glow. Shadows lurked everywhere, swallowing the space between each pulse of light. Carter grabbed his flashlight. Backup generators should have engaged. Why aren't they? He didn't finish. Because Rex barked. A loud, sharp warning bark. The kind he only used when danger was right on top of them. Mark stepped back from the door, heart racing. They're here. Carter pressed his back to the wall. How many? Rex barked again, twice, short and urgent. Mark whispered too. Then they heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, metallic, like tactical boots striking tile. Coming closer. Security shouted down the hall. Identify yourself. Silence. Then a thud, someone hitting the floor. Fear shot through Mark like electricity. Carter whispered, we need to move the girl. But Mark shook his head sharply. If we move her, we expose the hallway. They want us to run. Rex barked again, 3 rapid barks now. Mark interpreted instantly. They're splitting up, he whispered. One from the front, one from the side corridor. Carter inhaled shakily. They're flanking us. Mark steadied himself, adrenaline burning through him. He unlatched Rex's harness. Rex, he whispered, guard. Rex lowered himself to the floor, muscles coiled, eyes blazing. Mark checked the crib, still secure, the girl still asleep, blissfully unaware of the danger creeping closer. Carter raised his radio. This is Agent Carter, pediatric unit breached. We need immediate tactical support. Static. The line was dead. They cut the power, Mark said. They killed the comms too. He reached for the crib rail. And then, a soft click. The doorknob turned. Slow, silent, controlled. Carter raised his weapon. Mark. But Mark was already moving, placing himself between the crib and the door, every muscle in his body ready to fight. The knob turned again. Another click. And then, the door began to open. Just an inch, then 2, then 4. And in the narrow gap, the silhouette of a figure stood motionless, faceless in the red emergency light, dressed in black tactical gear. The intruder didn't speak. He didn't move. He only stared. Rex's growl filled the room, low and primal. Mark steadied his breathing. This was it. Everything had led to this moment. The child, the mark, the dead woman, the warning call, the breach, the blackout. The enemy had finally arrived. And Mark had less than 2 hours to survive them. If this were happening to you, who would you trust right now? For a moment, no one breathed. The intruder stood framed in the doorway like a shadow carved out of the red emergency glow. He didn't step forward, didn't raise a weapon, didn't speak. He simply stood there, as if studying the room, studying them. Mark's pulse hammered inside his skull. Beside him, Carter held his weapon steady, though the slight tremor in his arm betrayed him. Rex stayed low, teeth bared, rumbling a warning sound so deep it vibrated through the floor. The figure finally moved, but not to attack. Instead, he slowly tilted his head. A small, eerie gesture. As if acknowledging his opponents. As if saying, I found you. Then the figure lunged. Mark reacted instantly. Rex, G.O. Rex leaped forward with explosive force just as the intruder shoved the door fully open. It slammed against the wall, the entire frame shaking. Carter fired one shot, missed in the chaos. The intruder dodged with inhuman swiftness, rolling into the room and striking out with a baton-like weapon. Rex met him midair. The collision was violent, a blur of fur and muscle against black armor. The intruder stumbled, surprised by Rex's power, but recovered quickly, grabbing Rex by the harness and trying to twist him away. But Rex was trained for this. He wasn't letting go. Mark charged, using his full weight to tackle the man from behind. They crashed into a supply cart that toppled over, metal instruments clattering across the tile like falling coins. Carter moved in to help, but as he approached, another figure appeared in the side corridor window, another intruder. "Second one," Carter shouted. The glass pane shattered inward as the second attacker smashed through it with terrifying precision. Everything erupted at once. The first intruder slammed Mark against the wall with brutal force, knocking the breath from his lungs. The second intruder vaulted over the shards of broken glass, heading directly toward the crib. "No," Mark choked out. Carter fired, hitting the second intruder in the shoulder. He staggered but didn't stop. He kept moving, relentless, mechanical, like pain didn't matter. Rex, still locked in a struggle with the first attacker, yanked free and spun toward the second. Mark grabbed the first intruder's arm, twisting hard, forcing him off balance. "You're not taking her," he growled through clenched teeth. The attacker didn't respond. He fought without emotion, without hesitation. Not a trafficker, not a thug. Trained. Elite. A ghost in human form. The kind of man Elias Kearns would send to retrieve something precious to him. The kind of man who would not leave without the child. Carter shoved a rolling medical table between himself and the second intruder, trying to slow him down. The man vaulted over it with athletic ease. Carter ducked behind equipment, firing 2 more shots down the narrow space between beds. One hit center mass. Again, the intruder barely flinched. "Vest," Carter muttered. "They're armored." "Focus him away from the crib," Mark yelled. "I'm trying." Rex attacked the second intruder from the side, biting down hard on his arm. The intruder jerked, slammed Rex against a wall, but Rex didn't let go. He twisted, pulling the attacker off course, dragging him away from the child. Mark felt a surge of gratitude. Then the first intruder struck him again. A punch to the ribs, a knee to the stomach, a blow to the back that sent sparks flying behind Mark's eyes. He crashed to the floor, gasping. The intruder stepped over him and advanced toward the crib. Mark forced himself up despite the pain. "No, no, no." He lunged, grabbing the man's ankle, yanking hard. The intruder toppled but kicked back viciously, striking Mark in the jaw. Carter tried to intercept, but the second intruder had recovered, grabbing Carter by the throat and slamming him into a cabinet. The room felt like a battleground. Machines toppled, glass crunched, alarms wailed incomplete tones from failing power lines. And in the center of it all, the little girl slept, oblivious, fragile, helpless. Mark knew he was losing. He knew they all were. The first intruder rose again, reaching for the crib rail. Mark's vision blurred, but he saw enough to understand one terrible truth. If he failed now, if Rex fell, if Carter fell, the child would be gone. Stolen back into the dark world, she had barely escaped. Mark pushed himself up on trembling arms. This wasn't just a case anymore. It wasn't just duty. It wasn't even just justice. It was personal. He launched himself at the intruder one last time, not with skill, not with technique, but with raw desperation. They collided, knocking against the crib. The little girl stirred and let out a small whimper. The sound made the intruder freeze for a split second. It was all Rex needed. Rex shot across the room like a blur, teeth sinking into the attacker's thigh. The man cried out, sharp, frustrated, and swung downward with the baton. "Rex," Mark shouted. The blow connected. Rex yelped. Something inside Mark snapped. He grabbed the metal IV pole beside him and swung with all the strength he had left. It crashed against the intruder's helmet with a metallic crack. The man staggered, dazed. Mark hit him again and again, until the intruder slumped. But the second intruder was still standing, still fighting Carter, still pushing toward the crib. Mark's chest heaved, his ribs throbbed with every breath, his vision swam, but he forced himself forward again. He looked to Rex. Rex was injured, limping, but alive. "Stay back," Mark whispered. Rex didn't listen. Rex pushed forward. Mark and the dog advanced together, 2 against 1. The second intruder saw them coming. He shoved Carter aside and reached behind his belt, pulling out a small, metallic object. A tranquilizer injector. Not for adults. For children. Mark's blood ran cold. He went rigid, every muscle locking as the intruder snapped the injector open. That was it. That was the real mission. They weren't here to kill. They were here to retrieve. Alive. And no matter what happened, the intruder's job was to ensure the child left with him, even if he had to disable everyone else in the room to do it. "Don't you dare touch her," Mark whispered. The intruder raised the injector. And Rex struck first. Despite the pain, despite the injury, Rex launched himself at the man with a force Mark didn't know he still had. They crashed into the corner, hitting a metal cabinet so hard it dented. The injector skidded across the floor. Mark dove for it, but the intruder dove too. Their hands collided. Mark gripped it, the intruder gripped harder. For a moment, they were locked in a deadly tug-of-war over a single vial of clear liquid. Mark pushed with everything he had, but the intruder was stronger. He twisted, overpowering Mark, turning the injector toward Rex. "No," Mark cried. He slammed the man's arm sideways. The injector fired. A tiny hiss of compressed air. But the needle struck the intruder's own thigh. His body seized. His grip loosened. He staggered back, eyes wide in shock. Then he collapsed. Rex limped to Mark's side and leaned against him, panting hard. Mark wrapped an arm around him, tears stinging his eyes. "Good boy, you saved her. You saved all of us." Carter, bruised and coughing, stumbled to his feet. "They're down," he rasped. "Both of them, but we don't know how many more are coming." Mark nodded weakly. "We move her now." "Agreed." They approached the crib. The little girl looked up at them, half awake now, tiny hands clutching the blanket. She wasn't crying. She wasn't afraid. She was just watching. Like she recognized who had been fighting for her. Like she knew she was safe. Mark lifted her gently into his arms. "We're getting you out of here," he whispered, voice cracking. And for the first time she made a sound, a tiny, breathy whisper. A single word. Not fear, not confusion, not pain. "Rex." Mark froze. Carter went still. Rex lifted his head, ears perked. She knew his name. Somehow, somewhere, someone had told her about Rex. Mark held her close, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. What would your heart be telling you at this point?